What this feature, if I understand this correctly, it allows you to specify that you want a, let's say, a Redis instance or an RDS instance that is production ready just by asking for the environment variables that represent their connection strings, whether it's the host, the port, the login, etc. And then what happens in the background is we set everything up from the infra side and then give you back the environment variables needed, or the connection strings, the login access, for you to be able to configure your API or your SDK to use them without having us support your specific library or your specific client that you want to use.
Right. So say we enable this methodology for something like KV or FS in the future. That would allow you to go use the Dynamo client by default without needing anything from us. We'll create the resources for you. We'll give you the table name, whatever else you need to actually interact with it. But you can use AWS clients. You can use other clients that we don't support, etc. So here we have ORM, Redis node, Redis cluster. So the kind is persist underscore ORM, persist underscore Redis node, etc. So we're extending the kind since this follows the Klotho persist annotation, and then the value of essentially the resource that we're trying to get. So for ORM, we support connection string. And today for Redis, we support host and port. And the reason that we're supporting those to start out with is that's because that's what we use to actually make the clients work for what we already support. So it's the minimal work. So if you go ahead and do this annotation, it doesn't have to be attached to a node. And I already have it run there, but if you run Klotho, you'll see that it's actually generating a persist Redis with my Redis node, a persist ORM with my ORM, and a persist Redis cluster with my Redis cluster, which is just these annotations for my Redis cluster, my ORM, and my Redis node. I went ahead and I already ran Pulumi up. And if you actually go to the Lambda that it deployed, we can see the names ORM connection string, the Redis host, Redis node port, and Redis port that we declared for each of these resources set to their corresponding values here. So we were able to create a MemoryDB cluster, an Elasticache Redis cluster, and an RDS instance just through directing that we wanted environment variables and have those environment variables injected into our code. This will also work if you still annotate a client. So if you still use Sequelize and you specified environment variables, you could still set the connection string to an environment variable, which we aren't controlling in our runtime. But this just gives you the flexibility of not using Sequelize or using a library which we don't support. When you're running locally, you can set those environment variables to localhost and the port that corresponds to your local Redis. But when you're actually running on AWS, we will spin up a Redis cluster or a Redis node, whatever you've told us to do, and we'll inject those environment variables for you so that it'll run cloud native. And the use case that this is really going to correlate to is dependency injection, because that kind of follows we have a bunch of resources, just have whatever your compute needs to pull them from the same file, which all it knows is I'm going to grab an environment variable, and that's how it's going to tell you what to connect with. So we can very much follow the dependency injection route of how to set up projects.
I like that little cat. I'm going to install this on my VS Code.
I don't know how to get rid of it, so it's just there.
Awesome. All right. Let's keep it moving. Whenever you're ready, David.
Okay. Last week, I spent some time working on syntax highlighting for our VS Code extension. Originally, there was some basic support for TypeScript, where we had some coloring for the Klotho annotation and the capability name. So now we have some additional highlighting, making sure that we've got the braces highlighted, as well as any TOML that you put inside your annotation. All right, we start with our ID and then say we wanted to add something like a new section in here. Let's call this. So this is technically a table. And then inside that table, we can add some more directive, right? And then let's say we want to do an integer value. So now that integer will be highlighted as an integer. And it's the same thing with any other types. Additionally, before we only supported TypeScript. And so now we have support for other languages like Python, and then also for YAML file. And then you can also put it in Docker files. And then the latest thing I added here, which is a little bit experimental, is these gutter icons that are put in for each annotation just to make it stand out a little bit more from the rest of your code. So if you have a Klotho annotation, then right next to it in the gutter, you'll get an additional little indicator letting you know that you've got a legit Klotho annotation here.
Very nice. All right. Awesome.
Fantastic. So thanks, folks.
Yep. Thanks, everyone. See you all at the docs discussion a bit later.
See ya.
Cool. See ya.
Bye.